For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Gisela Pereira, and I'm Project and Research Associate at Southern Voice. I'll be moderating the session today. So welcome again to those who haven't heard my welcome yet. So let me briefly outline how we'll proceed today. Um, we will start with some opening remarks. And maybe we can have the slide, Aziza. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. We'll start with some opening remarks from our executive director, Margarita Gomez. And then we'll move right away to the questions that we prepared for our wonderful panel today, just to kickstart. After that, we'll open the floor for all of you. So you'll be able to ask questions, share your own insights, perhaps offer other perspectives as well. So we'll be keen to hear from you. And so if any questions come to mind during the panel discussion, for example, you can go ahead and type them in the chat box and we'll address them when the time comes. If we have time at the very end, we can close off with some final remarks from the panelists and some key takeaways. But let's see how long our discussion takes us. That's our main goal today, is to really focus on this discussion. So there's Margarita. Hello, good morning to you. Without any further delay, then I'll pass it over to you, Margarita, so that you can give us a welcome.
Thank you so much, Gisela, and thank you everybody for joining today. As you know, Southern Voice Talks is a platform that we created with the purpose of having a space for researchers, practitioners, policymakers, global stakeholders to come and exchange knowledge and to really have this space where key stakeholders, academics, and our members can come and share the knowledge that they are creating based on the priorities and on the challenges that they face every day. The first edition of the Southern Voice Talks was focused on our Global South Perspective publication, where there is also a space that Southern Voice have created to invite our members to discuss some of the most pressing issues in the development agenda. And we started this year discussing about local solutions to global challenges in the financing for development. That was a conversation that was very important because we have the financing for development conference in June, and it was really is one of the main topics that we are discussing about how we are going to be financing development. Then we discuss about youth and youth as a catalyst for change. You know that in our countries in the global south, we will have in few years almost 80% of the population is going to be part of the new generation, and we need to really think how can we include them in the processes, not just as a checkpoint, but also how can we include them meaningfully. Then we have our third session that it was on climate. And in this, it was an in-person session that we hosted during our conference. The purpose is to really define the priorities of the global south in the climate agenda. And finally, today we are here to discuss security matters. And the focus of this conversation of today is to think about security, not just as the traditional way of doing it, but also including and broadening what includes security. And we are going to be talking about the challenges that technology, artificial intelligence bring to security, but also how security challenges are presenting in our countries in different areas. And maybe just to finalize, pointing out that the security issues in the global south is one of the priorities, and we are very committed to pushing this topic in the agenda of the sustainable development, because we need peace and we need stable institutions in order to really move forward. Finally, I just want to say thank you again for joining, for taking the time. I know that December is a very challenging month of the year because we are closing many of the projects, initiative, and also getting prepared for what is coming next. So we value a lot your presence here, and please guide us in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margarita. It was a great recap of this wonderful series that we've had throughout this year, and many more to come next year. So we hope you all join. So as Margarita started introducing, and as you probably all have already seen, the theme for our discussion today is broadening the security perspective from other undergoverned spaces to digital vulnerabilities. And in this highly interconnected world, the security threats are adapting, taking on new forms, adopting new strategies. And while the existence of non-state armed groups, for example, one of our topics for today, is as old as the state itself, we've seen the alarming kind of complexification of the way these groups organize themselves, how they fund, diversify, and even internationalize their operations, how they occupy territory, how they engage with and even infiltrate governments, right? So, and similarly, the spread of false information is also not something new. But the use of AI and other digital tools has brought an unprecedented scale and speed and has been able to destabilize entire countries, fostering polarization and even different forms of violence. When we look at these two examples, and similarly with other security threats, we see a few elements in common, right? They thrive in the absence of state governance and regulation, and I think we'll be talking a lot about that today. They also critically undermine democratic institutions and participation. And third, they are aggravated by the speed at which the technologies and strategies are evolving. And finally, and one of the reasons why we're here is they require international cooperation and coordinated action to be adequately addressed. So these last items that I mentioned are some of the conclusions that we can take from these two pieces published in the Southern Voice Global South Perspective journal, or the GSP as we call it for short. And we're happy to have the authors of these pieces who are going to share a little bit more about that today, as well as two excellent commentators joining us. So I would like to welcome our insightful panel that we have for today. First up, we have Ranjini Hadravendra, who is an advisor with the Public Affairs Center in India, as well as the executive director of the Center for Global Health and Development and professor of public policy at RV University. So her piece in the journal examines how misinformation and disinformation have threatened internal security in India, particularly with the emergence of AI. I would also like to welcome Alexander Coswell, who's a fellow at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, Capri, in Jamaica. Alexander's piece, on the other hand, looks at the connections between non-state armed groups and other undergoverned spaces in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are also joined by Diana Thornburn, who is Alexander's co-author. So thank you all for joining and for your important contribution to our journal. I think my colleagues are also going to put the link to the journal in the chat so everyone can open the pieces and take a read after we leave this session.
And finally, the second trend.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Then over to our two commentators that we have for today. We have Gaurav Sharma, visiting fellow at the Center for Digital Governance at the Hertie School in Berlin. He specializes in artificial intelligence as well and digital transformation strategy, working with governments and international organizations on digital governance with particular focus on the Global South. His experience with policy and technology nexus will be great to hear and will complement very nicely today, especially the piece on AI. And finally, our fourth panelist is Akim Tijani, Associate Research Professor of Political Science and International Relations at the Political and Governance Policy Department at the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Research. Akim has over 30 years of experience researching governance, development, and security challenges in Africa. So he will bring yet another perspective from another country. That way we have all three regions of the Global South covered in today's panel. So thank you all for coming in and for your availability to share your insights with us in this panel today. So I'll go right to our questions. The first question is to our two speakers, Ranjini and Alexander. And I wanted to ask you to share a little bit more with us what specific challenge your GSP piece aims to address and why it's relevant today. So, Ranjini, would you like to start?
Yeah. Thank you all for joining. Misinformation, disinformation, fake news, hate speech, all of which is collectively called information pollution, is a growing global risk today. This is hindering human progress, and this needs to be immediately addressed, particularly in the global south. In this paper, I what I've done is I've analyzed the drivers and consequences of information pollution, specifically focusing on India, and have proposed a few strategies to safeguard integrity. Information integrity is accuracy, reliability, and consistency of information that we can use. What I have done is I have examined its impact on political processes and public health by conducting. I have what initially I started doing literature review, and then I interviewed experts who are working in this field for many years now, and I also did a case analysis. India's case illustrates the urgent need for practical solutions, international cooperation, and stronger regulations to ensure information integrity. Given this time in which we are in, AI generated misinformation poses a significant challenge, and most of it remains unregulated, amplifying the scale and the reach of false information through tools like, you all know, deepfakes. Global South governments and institutions are ill equipped to safeguard information integrity in the face of these rapidly evolving technologies, and there is an urgent need for stronger policies and technological cooperation. Most importantly, information pollution disproportionately affects minorities, migrants, those who have low literacy, making them more vulnerable to manipulation. That said, generative AI is fundamentally changing how information is created, distributed, and consumed, as you all know. And the most important aspect is that the general public, their inability to discern which is accurate, which is trustworthy, that is a very pressing challenge at this moment. Yeah.
Thank
And
you very
there was
much,
this
Ranjini, and thank you for the
report,
excellent.
2024 Global Risk Report, which says that misinformation and disinformation is the number one risk in India, ahead of kind of infectious diseases, illicit economic activity, and labor shortages. So they have put misinformation on the top of the list. Yeah, I'll stop here. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. Alexander, do you want to take on the same question?
Sure, thanks, Isabel. So our paper builds on a literature of on undergoverned spaces and non-state armed groups. It is well established and well documented that undergoverned spaces, particularly, well, in any country, but particularly in developing or global South countries, provide safe havens for non-state armed groups. and that non-state armed groups around the world are linked, often linked in transnational threat networks, whether that be terrorist networks or transnational trafficking, narco trafficking networks or human trafficking networks. But our paper really wants to address and dig into the idea of undergovernance. What does it mean for a space to be undergoverned? And we're talking about, in our paper, we're talking about physical space. And especially what does this mean in in small countries, countries where, countries like Jamaica and Trinidad, where it is, it's difficult for it's to find a space that is distant from the state and thus be insulated from governance. And how do non-state armed groups thrive in spaces in small territories where the state is not far away? And so this is the kind of the challenge, the the idea that we sought to explore. And Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica made for good case studies because these are countries with a long histories, decades-long histories of playing host to non-state armed groups that have gone almost unimpeded. And without the state being able to take control of the spaces permanently that these non-state armed groups occupy. And the reason why it's relevant today is because, well, non-state armed groups are getting stronger, because mostly due to advancing technology. We are already seeing it, for example, if you look over into Haiti right now, we've already come into the age where gangs are operating kamikaze drones. Right? This is so the capabilities available to non-state armed groups are becoming more formidable. And telecommunications, the internet, the digital transformation of the world is also making cooperation between non-state armed groups more convenient. And so the ability of non-state armed groups to thrive in each country threatens other countries, threatens the neighbors. The gangs in Jamaica participate in narco trafficking with the gangs in Haiti and gun traffic, weapons trafficking. They also export violence producers to places like the United States. The Islamist groups in Trinidad and Tobago during the days of ISIS sent the most foreign fighters per capita to Trinidad and Tobago. So it threatens other states. And also, it's important for global South countries to take a look at taking responsibility for international governance by looking at their own securing their own territory, because we're coming into an era where, over the last 25 years, the great powers have been focused heavily on transnational threat networks, but that's no longer the case. Now we're seeing a return to more great power competition and less of a focus on networks. I should say that we wrote this paper before the U.S. administration was drone bombing narco traffickers in the sea, but even that has a great power element to it, and that wouldn't be happening if the Caribbean countries that have functioned as whose territories have functioned as facilitators for that kind of narco trafficking if those Caribbean states would have taken care of the situation beforehand. So I'll leave that there for this question.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexander and Jeannie. I know that in Brazil, those are two big issues as well, and I'm sure in many of our other countries, that's also the case. And based on your research, why do you think, why would you argue that we must rethink our understanding or our definitions of what are security challenges? What emerged from your findings that support this? And maybe now Alexander can go first.
Okay, so we have to rethink our perspective on the whole issue of the relationship between undergovernance and security, because traditional security approaches it kind of ignore the non-security foundations of non-state armed group power. Right? Though non-state armed groups do not do not flourish in states because of lack of firepower on behalf of those states. It's not because Jamaica doesn't have the military security capabilities that we're not able to deal with the average 20-year-old with untrained gangs of untrained 20-year-olds with AKs. So we have to relook at why do these groups, these non-state armed groups, uh, persist over decades and flourish. And so we hammered down on I said we want to look at the nature of undergoverned states. And the conclusion we came to is that the undergoverned spaces within the territories of the countries to look at are really areas of irregular land settlements, whether it's informal settlements, politically protected social housing communities, these kind of areas where the regular kind of real estate market doesn't apply, and it is not governed by the rule of law, but the state has declined to enforce property rights or govern property rights, and so it has allowed groups to capture those property rights. And but also we what also makes it we have to rethink this is because it's not even just a matter of lack of firepower. It's not even a matter of why states allow these groups these spaces to persist. It's not even a matter of weak state capacity. It's political expedience. And what I mean by political expedience is that these government spaces exist sometimes within the capital city of the country. And if any time the state wanted, it could theoretically, extend the rule of law, regularize these areas, whether they be informal communities or social housing spaces. But they decline not to. Why they decline not to is because uh, they these spaces often function as there's a political reason for them to exist, whether they function as vote banks for politicians come election time. So the democratic nature of these countries is also hinders their ability to govern their territory. And we need to look at it needs to be the political expediency aspect of this needs to be documented because it's important for the international community to understand that why states with the ability, with the capacity, with the capabilities, why they are not able to challenge or change the situation with regard to armed groups controlling territory within their national boundaries. I think I leave it there.
Thank you, Alexander. And I think maybe Branjini is also finding many echoes with her piece based on what you said. So, Branjini, over to you.
Yeah. While I was writing this paper and analyzing my data, I realized that this topic is under research, particularly from a global south perspective. So, because of the lack of studies, of in depth studies on countering information pollution in global south, there is a risk that findings from global north, where there is a lot of research happening around this topic, findings from that and strategies that are suitable for global north will be applied to global south, or that there will be generalization between global south countries. So this gap in scientific knowledge is kind of alarming, especially that because strategies that work or interventions that work in global north may not be effective in global south context. So, promoting media literacy, governments must implement educational strategies to uh, kind of increase public awareness of the dangers of information pollution, use of ethical use of online content, particularly focus on marginalized group. This significant challenge is that we need kind of stronger policies and also technological cooperation. So in my study, I focused on political polarization. The two themes that I kind of deep dived into was political polarization and health infodemic. Um, uh, After COVID, we have seen WHO define this term as infodemic, where there is too much of information, false information, misleading information, both digital in the digital and physical environments. Particularly if it is during a disease outbreak, infodemics cause confusion and um, uh, the the behavior of the public in response to this health emergency is hampered, and infodemic does kind of intensify or lengthen outbreaks sometimes when people are unsure about what to do that they are supposed to be doing. So this kind of ease at which misinformation can be spread, especially in this generative AI kind of environment, is alarming, and it's a cause of worry.
Thank you both for this round. Now I'll ask our commentators to join the conversation. So first of all, Akim, could you share some thoughts on how the experiences with non-state armed groups are similar to or different from what Alexander described in Africa, in the African case, in the African context? Akim, I don't know if you've already started, but you're muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important forum. First and foremost, if you look at the insecurity in Africa, it's becoming too alarming. And I would attribute this to what we call a governance gap. If a state is unable to control its territory, what happens is that the non-state armed groups would take over. And as you are aware, there is no vacuum in power. It flows from area of higher concentration to area of lower concentration. Now, because the state has left that territory ungoverned, the non-state actors would take over and control that space. And even though they don't have that authority, but they make use of that power to control the space. And it manifests in so many ways, which is so disturbing to African countries, in that it has reduced the revenue that will have ordinarily accrued to the state. For example, in Nigeria, when you have these terrorist groups, Boko Haram, when they occupy a territory, they impose tax on people. So in other words, both the citizens and the state are the receiving end of this insecurity. The state is unable to perform its responsibility. And the citizens too are unable to perform their obligatory responsibilities to the state. So the non-state armed groups now take over, control the state, control the tax that is ordinarily belong to the state. So, and this thing manifests in so many ways. That is for Africa. If you compare those films with that of Caribbean, particularly Trinidad and Jamaica, these armed groups mostly for profit making. In Africa, it's quite different. It's about an ideological issue. And that's why you would see when the Sahelian state exited from West Africa, from ECOWAS, one of the reasons they gave was that the ECOWAS was tilting towards the Western orientation. Again, I would let you to know that when Niger exited from ECOWAS, one of the policies they made was that they made Hausa the official language. So if you look at all these things, it's tilting towards ideological issue. Again, if you look at when they exited, I mean the Sahelian state, when they exited, they formed an alliance with Mauritania that exited the regional group several years ago. Now, if you look at the population of these countries, look at the population of state of Niger, look at the population of Mali and Burkina Faso, they are Muslim-dominated states. Again, if you look at the population of Mauritania that left several years ago, it's Muslim-dominated country. So they formed an alliance, and this alliance is towards the orientation of Arabic culture. So in some ways, in Africa, where insecurity can be said to be well, as a sort of governance issue, it's also ideological, and that's why it's a bit difficult for a country to resolve this issue, because once it's an ideological, it's become more precarious for that state to curb insecurity.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you so much, Akin. I think it's a bit disheartening to see so many similarities, but when we get to the recommendations, hopefully we'll find some joint solutions. Now, finally, Gaurav has been waiting patiently. Over to you. You worked extensively on AI governance and digital transformation across different contexts. So how do these experiences that Ranjini talked about in India resonate with what you're seeing globally? And what are the risks of ignoring these?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, kind invitation, and thank you for the setting the tone of the debate. I think one of the things which AI does propagate in the context of mis and disinformation is in elections. And I tried to cover East Africa with the English speaking countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Rwanda, and you can actually see that the extent of misinformation or disinformation incorporates many ideological parts to it. It's not only propaganda, it's not only polarization and hate speech, but there is a larger modulation of change of thought, make this young population think differently, right? So there's a notion of making people believe in untruth. It's basically believing in lies, right? So there is a sense of articulation, and in the absence of legal uh, you know laws, or what you say, regulations, or even standards or guidelines, uh, there is a proliferation of AI enabled applications or tools and services. And as Alexander and Ranjini had highlighted, it gets amplified with the use of telecommunication tools, whether it's chat services or it's voice services. And now they are getting more and more visible in context of local languages. So if you take Kenya, Kiswahili, the dialects, so it really becomes more voiced, in the public domain. Secondly, I think it's not only the capabilities which are formidable in terms of use of AI, but it is also the ease of access and ease of delivery of this information, which is far more easier to now create a fake video or a fake voice or a fake image, and then sort of broadcast it to the population scale dynamics. So I think that's the fear of the government, and yes, it proliferates in global south more because the government institutional capacities, or I would say cyber security capabilities in the context of information and broadcasting are not yet developed to really pinpoint or sort of get to the criminals and sort of uphold them or sort of charge them with certain I don't know digital infringement rights or legal and sort of hold a legal proceeding against them. So it's like a little bit of a free flow market for mis and disinformation, and that's where it is challenging
Yeah.
the public service delivery services. So even if you have, I just want to end it like if you have DPIs, the digital public infrastructure, you have, but it's not now financial inclusion, it's actually financial fraud. So this has become a content of worry with the use of AI in global south. I mean, but I picture East Africa and also like East Asia, like Indonesia and Malaysia, where the population is generally accustomed to using English as a language. And yeah, and that's more of these tools are still working in the English language domain rather than in the local languages. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, and thank all of our panelists for this first round. Now, because we really want to hear, I'm seeing in the chat that people are already sending in the questions. I'm going to ask you to try to be very brief in this last round. It's a bit sad because now I wanted to talk about the recommendations and the solutions, because we don't want to end on a very negative note. But so. I'll split this question. It's a question about recommendations that goes basically to all four of you, but I'll split it in two. So for Alexander and Ranjini, based on the research that you did for your pieces, what would be the one recommendation that you would really push, if you could really nudge policymakers today? And then for our two commentators, Akim and Gaurav, based on your work on international cooperation and looking at the issues that you've examined already, what do you think would be some concrete steps in terms of international cooperation, rather South-South cooperation or North-South cooperation, in order to really address these security challenges in the future? So maybe I'll start with Ranjini. If anyone needs me to repeat the question, please feel free to ask, because I've merged a little bit. So go ahead, Ranjini.
Yeah, the one thing that I have stressed in my paper is to establish a high-level South-South, Global South consortium to deal with this issue. There is need for more funding, research, and particularly advocacy to map Global South information ecosystem and strengthen the ability of the governments to counter information pollution. Implement accountability mechanisms for AI-driven content. And more importantly, I feel tech companies and platforms must be made responsible, and they should help prevent spread of misinformation, strengthening fact-checking organizations, mechanisms, and expanding their collaborations. There are checkers, and uh, there is funding constraints, and journalists and tech platforms can help identify and counter false information swiftly. So, last point is that there are a few strategies like pre-bunking, debunking after the information has been spread, and also contextual labeling tags and credibility tags, and the last point is media and information literacy. These are the key.
Thank you so much. Alexander, over to you.
All right, thanks. So if I could just pick one recommendation, it would be that policymakers focus on land tenure regularization. Now, as I said, the paper pointed out that the undergoverned spaces really boil down to irregular land settlements. informal settlements in social housing communities, other settlements that are isolated from the official land use policies of the government and are allowed to do that. So the reason the modern regime of land ownership globally, I'm talking globally, co-evolved with democratic governance and modern parliamentary governance in particular, because this is how the allocation of property rights is how democratic governance govern territory. They allow this is the it's so land tenure regularization, having your own property title. It's not just a means of economic empowerment. It's an unrecognized or underhailed mechanism of governance. And it also aligns the citizen with the state and aligns their interests together. And so this is and the absence of property rights or property rights enforcement allows a space for non-state armed groups to go in and govern because they declare themselves the allocator or the defender of property rights. This is this is how non-state armed groups take control and hold territory over long periods of time by being the arbiter of local disputes, in particular with it relates to property rights, where the state has declined to play that role for whatever reason. And so this is now in other locations like in Nigeria stuff, there's issues with space and distance from the capital and state capacity and lack of infrastructure. But the land tenure regularization can go a long way to fixing all those things. And we use the case study of Peru. Peru we see as one of the most the Peru's concentrated campaign against the Shining Path, Sendero Luminoso, is the exemplar of the kind of land tenure regularization approach. There's empirical evidence now that suggests that the allocation of property rights is one of the key factors deciding whether citizens in a particular location would side with government or with insurgency. And it is also acknowledged, it was also acknowledged by the insurgency at the time, the land tenure organization at the time, in released documents that they found after the leader was captured, that this is one of the campaigns that they feared most, they were being displaced by the kind of economic regularization campaign in the hinterlands. And so this is the kind of one issue that I push on. And the international governance regime, USAID, the formal USAID, these international organizations do a lot of land tenure regularization work, but they mostly do it in rural areas, in farmlands, particularly so that farms can become more productive. But they don't do it with a security aspect. They don't do it in cities where most of these non-state armed groups are concentrated. And so the specific recommendation is that we need to look at land tenure regularization as a security instrument, not as an economic instrument. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexander. And interesting to see that regulation is something common in both of your recommendations. Maybe now, Gaurav.
Yeah, thanks. I think I'm a optimist in terms of thinking, but I also know that the devil is out in the open. So I do believe that the social media ban by like developed economies recently by Australia for teenagers and things actually set the tone of where the governance is looking at uh, improving or controlling the mechanism of information flow, right? So uh, there has always been utopia around technology, and I always look at technology as plastic or mobile phone. If we do not actually, plastic entered without understanding its disposal mechanisms post consumption, and even mobile phones were introduced without understanding the post consumption of data of how people will take it. So I think there are not one or two mechanisms. specifically in the global south with limited capacities. But I think there are some level of incremental steps or tools, or at least or mechanisms which help to penalize big techs or telecommunication to an extent. It can be you know carrot or stick policy, which people say can work, cannot work. But I think there is an overwhelming uh, uh, apprehension in controlling the information flow, from an ideological perspective of democratic values or rule of law and things like this. So I do not say there is one benchmark which can really help this mis and disinformation drive, but there could be individual um examples being set by countries. Fact checking for sure is a great articulation, but then the technology growth is, it's accelerating at a, light speed. And then, every 6 months something new comes out. But accountability benchmark tools can really, so basically linking current legal laws with the misinformation, disinformation aspect in sectors. Sector-based regulation can really help in terms of uh, sort of limiting the flow of information. It cannot be stopped, but it can be sort of trafficked, or can be checkpointed at level of consumption. Who can, I mean, you can actually restrict my phone to, if I cannot watch more than 1 hour of Instagram. You can actually do it, right? But the tech companies don't want to do it, right? So it's a limitation which can be enforced, and also on age groups. So there are solutions which the tech companies don't want to do, which are implementable. And that's, I would say, inadequacy of information understanding for with local governance capabilities, or within the government generally, right? So
Yeah.
they will not tell you what they're capable of. Yes, we can limit information. Yes, we can do this bracketing. You can close things, but and that's where I think the information gap exists.
Thank you. Yeah. Akeem, finally over to you. And if you could try to keep the time just to make sure we can get to the questions, please, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. As a continuation of my argument, that the ungoverned spaces need to be occupied by state government, by national government. If you discover that in those areas, when silent state exited ECOWAS, there is this expansive Sahel region. It was left unmanned before the exit. This silent state plus other international community were manning the Sahel region. The moment the Sahel states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso left the region, there is exodus of terrorists. And you will now notice that after that exit, we have series of attacks in Nigeria. And this is because those people that were manning that region are no longer there. So now we need to ensure that there is South-South collaboration and South-North collaboration. So those people should form what we had before, the multinational task force, to man those expansive areas in order to curtail the activities of these non-state armed groups. Again, there should be intelligence sharing among these national governments in order to ensure that these armed groups do not get. Let me give you an example. Just recently, they killed the armed group in Nigeria, killed a general in the Nigerian army because of this information sharing. So national governments should ensure that they collaborate with other southern states and other states from the north to ensure that they have sharing of intelligence in order to curtail the activities of these non-state armed groups. Again, there should be the sources of finance of these non-state armed groups. This should be known, should be identified and stopped. Because if you don't stop their the sources of their funding, they will continue to exhibit their nefarious activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hakeem, and for the excellent timekeeping as well. I really want to get to some of the excellent questions that we have in the chat. So, but I'll give you each maybe 1 minute to reply so that we can try to get to both of them. So this first one is for our AI researchers. The question is, what are your views on using AI to detect or prevent information pollution and help the public to identify misinformation? You've hinted about a little bit about this in your previous comments, but so maybe first Gaurav can start.
I mean, the tools exist, but it has to be like a cumulative, like it has to be a government effort, in a sense that the government can really enforce these tools to come into the light, that these tools are open source, these are available, we have to implement it, and this is done, right? So, I mean, that arrests or at least filters. It does not stop, but it filters the extent of mis or disinformation. So you will not have 1 million fake chats going around, but you will still have maybe 10,000 messages, or that's about it. I think that's the government has to enforce certain accountability, benchmarking, quality assessment tools, which are available. Yeah.
At least some harm reduction, right? So, Ranjini, please, over to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to add to what Gaurav just said. In the paper, I elaborate on two institutional interventions. Like, for example, during the 2024 parliamentary elections, Election Commission of India came down really heavily on and issued guidelines on ethical and responsible use of social media. So they said that if it's fake news or if it's disinformation, it has to be pulled down within 3 hours. So that was one instance at the central level. At the state level, where in Karnataka, where I reside, they set up a unit called Information Disorder Tackling Unit, where it was operational. The team was operational for 90 days, and they analyzed and they reviewed over 64,000 internet posts, and they escalated it to the legal review, and FIRs were filed against 18 of them. So institutional interventions such as these are important, along with kind of what Gaurav said about and regulation, of course. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ranjini. So I think another question that we have here in the chat is about the role of corruption in the spread and growth of non-state armed groups. And I think this one can go to both Alexander and Akim. You have 1 minute each. And maybe I'll start with Akim since he was our commentator. Would you like to start?
Thank you very much. If you look at issue of corruption, it's a worrisome in African countries. And the thing is that if you siphon the money that is meant for security, what you would have is the growth of non-state armed groups who would use that opportunity to perpetrate their nefarious activities. Now, if you look at quantum of money that has been stolen from Africans by African leaders, this money is enough to take care of security in African countries. But this money is siphoned abroad. Apart from that, if you have money that's meant for security and you divert that money to another thing, what you are saying is that those non-state armed groups have their way where they get money to finance themselves. So the money that's meant to protect the citizens is not given to the citizens, whereas the non-state armed groups get their money from their financials. So you see, there's a very strong linkage between corruption and non-state armed groups.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hakeem. Alexander?
So I'm going to talk about three types of corruption. Okay. One is the type of corruption in which an armed group penetrates the state system, whether they capture state actors or get to divert state resources or something, or use corrupt officials to protect themselves. So they corrupt police officers to inform them on police raids and that kind of stuff. That's one type way in which organized corruption helps insulate organized crime or armed groups. So this also applies to other forms of non-state armed groups, terrorist groups, and insurgents. The other way is clientelism. So the main reason irregular land settlements exist, as in Jamaica and Trinidad, is because of clientelism. Is because the same communities that function as safe havens for organized crime and for Islamist terrorist networks are the same communities that have the highest voter turnout in elections, and because politicians depend on them for votes. In many cases, especially in Jamaica, these informal settlements were the creation of politicians to secure vote banks in their particular constituencies. So clientelism is a very special form of corruption. And
Yeah.
but Hakeem reminded me of a third type of corruption that is seldom spoken about. It's the kind of corruption of international aid, all right, through what is known as the what we like to call we can call the social intervention complex. So money coming into the country. So over 3 decades, billions of US dollars have come into Jamaica to fight the gang problem. And these have gone mostly into kind of NGOs who are operating uh, things like parenting workshops and skills training courses in the most violent communities, with the hopes that, or basketball programs or football programs and stuff, with the hopes that investing in these kind of like soft social stuff will kind of get at-risk youth to not join gangs. But what happens is most of these interventions help because they have to work in gang-dominated communities, they have to work with the gangs. And because they have to work with the gangs, they reinforce the gangs' authority in these communities.
Mm.
And also the gangs use these programs as a means for employment for their underlings. So they actually extract resources from these intervention initiatives. And I'm not even just talking about Jamaica. This is most well dominated in Haiti. Haiti, the gangs in Haiti, the reason why they're so powerful the way they are now is because they were able to feed off of the international aid coming into Haiti through these NGOs. Right? That is not spoken about. The NGOs cooperating, whether willingly or unwillingly, with gangs is another form of corruption that really we don't speak about enough.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexander. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. This is such an interesting discussion. I wish we could continue it, but we've already gone over time. So thank you to everyone who also stayed and bared with us for these few extra minutes. So thank you again to our panelists. This has been incredibly insightful. Thank you to our partners for their support in making this event possible. And also, especially thanks everyone on the Southern Voice team for making the first edition of the SB Talks a big success. So kudos on that. And everyone, you can stay tuned for next year and the second edition of this round, which will be on an entirely different topic. So stay tuned on our social media and keep an eye on your emails for the next round. Yeah. Thank you again to everyone who joined, who submitted questions, and we hope to see you in the next round.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Great talk.
Thank you very
Everyone.
much,
Thank you.
Southern Voice.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye bye.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Bye-bye.